Hello, I am Rabbi Howie Goldsmith, and I'm joined by my friend and colleague, Rabbi Ira Eben, and this is Sacred Text Left to Right. Ira, would you start us off, please, with the text for today?
Sure, Howie. We're analyzing the story in Parshat Vayishlach from this week's portion, the story of Jacob wrestling with the angel. Jacob is left alone, and he finds himself that a man approaches him, or it seems to be perhaps some sort of divine spirit is approaching him. He wrestles with it, and they can't come up with a winner. And while he's doing this, he's actually hit on the side on his hip. And eventually he succeeds. He changes his name, but what we're going to be analyzing is that scene about him with the hip, where it says that because he was hit on the hip, therefore the Jewish people don't eat what's called in Hebrew the gid hanashah, which is the sciatic nerve, which is where most filet mignon comes from, which is why we can't find kosher filet mignon too often. And that's the story that we want to analyze. It's actually the Sefer HaChinuch brings it down as the third mitzvah in the Torah, and Howie is going to paraphrase the Sefer HaChinuch for us.
Okay, so the Sefer HaChinuch says, "From the roots of this commandment are to serve as an indication to Israel that though they will suffer many oppressions and exile by the nations of the descendants of Esau, i.e. the Christians, the Jews should trust that they will not perish, but rather that their descendants and name will stand firm forever, and that their Redeemer will come and redeem them from their oppressor." The Sefer HaChinuch then goes on to draw the analogy that just as Jacob suffered by the guardian angel of Esau in this wrestling, but in the end was redeemed and even received a blessing, so too the Jewish people will suffer under the descendants of Esau, but in the end will be redeemed. And all of their suffering, well, it doesn't say will have been worth it, but in the end, that they will be redeemed and the suffering will end. And so this leaves us with a difficult question of really anti-Semitism and the relationship between Jew and non-Jew for the last 3,000 years. Ira, you summed that relationship up well a minute ago. Would you care to sum that up again?
If only I remember what I said at the time, but I'm just pointing out that this could be what we're referring to. The Chinuch is being written somewhere. It actually was written anonymously. We don't know who wrote the Sefer Chinuch, the Book of Education, which is a wonderful work. We assume it was written around the 11th, 12th century, which is, of course, at the peak and the height of the Crusades and anti-Semitism in Europe. And their perspective of the Jew versus the non-Jew is that the Jew basically says, for lack of a better term, "Thank you, sir, may I have another?" And that's the whole relation. That's the constant concern against anti-Semitism. As Howie pointed out before, this hasn't changed. This is something, thankfully, it has as far as relationships, but there still exists that anti-Semitism in the background and hasn't gone away. And the question is, how do we perceive both the anti-Semitism and the relationship between Jews and non-Jews in general?
That's right. And just to that point, the FBI just released their annual report of hate crimes, and Jews suffered 54.4 or something like that % of religiously motivated hate crimes in this country this past year, remaining still the highest number of religiously motivated hate crime targeted in the United States.
Well, at least we're number one in something.
At least we're number one in something.
Yeah.
And so it's difficult. Look, for me, I think it's very important, to consider anti-Semitism, the relationship between Jew and non-Jew, and then also to consider our individual context, because history matters for the sake of a people, for a nation, but for any individual person, what matters is their relationships and how they interact with the world and their experiences. So we see that there's still this danger of anti-Semitism. But look, last week I had the honor of delivering an interfaith Thanksgiving sermon from the pulpit of a Catholic church, which is something that whoever wrote the Sefer HaChinuch couldn't have even imagined. It was simply out of the realm of possibility, out of the realm of imagination. So things are clearly much better than they were a long time ago. And the question for me is, how do we nurture that? How do we make things continually better?
I think you're right. Of course, you're right. And things are significantly better than they were. And this is, of course, after the 1960s when when the Christians basically said that they're going to make amends for the past of which was about 2,000 years of oppression for the Jewish people. Which isn't that long ago. It's a little over 50 years ago when that happened. But at the same time, I think the text and really the story that we have in Yaakov and Esav is this ultimate challenge of how do we deal with anti-Semites, whether they are abundant as they were at the time of the Chinuch, or they're few, but they're still very loud and very present. How do we deal with them? And part of the Chinuch is trying to convey is that we will triumph, that the sun will finally shine on us, that all of the pains and the suffering and the bruises will be healed eventually, hopefully sooner than later. But what we still have to recognize what is good and what is bad, and there's no gray lines. And I think the Chinuch wants us to point that out.
Well, not only are there no gray lines, but I actually want to look back at Jacob's example of how to deal with it, which I think is to wrestle it and to fight it, no holds barred, and that we might our hip might get wrenched in the process, but that we, what I see happening, for instance, this happened after Charlotte, is people said, well, the Nazis had the right to march and they had the right to speak their views. And we should just let them because the First Amendment, because of laws or whatever. And I see that First Amendment argument really as almost like a fig leaf. Yes, you do have the right to do it. And by the way, I have the fight to be like Jacob and to wrestle you as much as necessary to silence the kind of anti-Semitism that throughout history has led not to a civil discourse that is the goal of freedom of speech, but that has led to death for Jews. And I'm not going to sit patiently on the sideline with twiddling my thumb saying, well, you have the right to do this kind of hateful speech. I'm going to fight it tooth and nail. I'm going to fight it and wrestle you until that morning dawns.
So that was very poetic, by the way.
Thank you.
So just within the context of the story, I think that Jacob wrestles it physically and attacks it straight on. But at the same time, the angel, whatever it is, comes on and gives him a blessing and says, no longer will your name be Yaakov, your name will be Yisrael. If you want to truly be successful in fighting this and fighting the enemy, don't think that by abandoning Israel means Yashar Kel, straight to God. Don't think by abandoning your traditions. Don't think by abandoning your behavior. That will be you successful. You don't go below the belt, so to speak. Is that whoever we are, is that we're always going to be judged by we're going to be judged and scrutinized much more than anyone else, and that in order to be able to be successful in this world, we still have to be focused on Yisrael, Yashar Kel, who we are, where we go, what our values are, and never go below that.
It's an interesting perspective. I've never heard that it means straight to God before. For me, it's always been Yisrael, one who wrestles, one who struggles with God. And so for me, that means, being willing to question what is God, being willing to question what is my relationship with God and with the rest of the Jewish people, and what does it mean to be a Jew?
Yeah, so the way I always, Yashar Kel is it's really the plain definition, and of course there are the true translations and true interpretations do give us broad perspective. But Yashar Kel is where the Jewish people are. I think gives us our, I don't want to say uniqueness, but it gives us who we are and guides us. That our responsibility is always to be straight to God and always ask our question: what does God want us to do under these circumstances? Whether we're on top or bottom.
So I'm willing to agree that, obviously sticking with our values and who we are is incredibly important in this endeavor. But I also want to look at the story and see that there's wrestling down in the dirt too. And perhaps not below the belt, but we need to engage with the world as it is. We can't be like the people in the Hanukkah story who first would not fight back on Shabbat and got slaughtered. If necessary, we need to be like the Maccabees and break the Sabbath and fight on Shabbat. So it doesn't involve abandoning our.
If I could jump on that.
It doesn't involve abandoning our values and who we are and what our traditions are. And at the same time, I need to go and preach at the Catholic Church. I need to engage and reach out there and be in the arena with everybody else in order to build the alliances and the relationships necessary to overcome those anti-Semites, to fight against those people marching in Charlotte.
So I'm going to jump on the previous thing what you said. I want to remind that obviously they were wrong, and there was certain zealotry involved in the Maccabees, the original Maccabees, and that they wouldn't fight on Shabbat, and obviously that was wrong according to Jewish law. But at the same time, one of the things that they did do is every morning before they went out to battle, they fasted because they knew that their strength is going to come from God. It's obviously an extreme. We don't necessarily prescribe that. But it was important that they knew that this is a battle. This is a spiritual battle. Now, we're going to be fighting this. We're going to be able to have to know that everything, that all of our success physically is going to be through spiritual means. And we're going to do everything we can. But we're going to fight on Shabbat because that's the law. But we're also going to fast to recognize that it's a Yom Kippur for us as well.
Okay. Well, look, we're approaching the 10-minute mark. I love the Sefer HaChinuch text and this idea of hope out of struggle. That at the end of struggle, there is redemption, and that we see it not only with Jacob but also with the struggles of our time. The Sefer HaChinuch saw it in his time and said, maybe not for my generation, but ultimately we will find redemption. And I look to that as hopeful for our day too, and for whatever struggles that we are fighting with, either personally or as a people, that in the end, redemption is promised for those who are true to who they are and who are willing to take a stand and to do the wrestling necessary to reach their objective. So I really appreciate you bringing this text.
Well, I'm glad too. And I think the point you made about hope, Jonathan Sachs says this all the time, Rabbi Sachs, he says that the one gift that the Jewish people gave to the world was the gift of tikvah, the gift of hope. That despite the fact it's not, we're around for these thousands of years, it's not because we've had success. We were around despite the fact that we've been persecuted and haven't been wrestled with and stepped on and attacked constantly for the last 2,000 years. And that we may have our bruises and our injuries, just as Jacob did. But that us not eating the Gidanasha is a reminder that those bruises will be healed. That, as you said, that we have that true hope and belief that God will have the sun shine on us after dawn, as you said eloquently before.
Beautiful, beautiful. Okay, thanks a lot, Ira. Have a great week.
Thanks, Howard. You too. Be well.